Hey everybody, it's very late Saturday night, but I was just watching some videos from Typebook, which I've linked below, and they're a YouTube channel, and they do a fantastic job doing a little FE INFJ to INFJ connection here. Um, they do a fantastic job, I think, of breaking down people. And generally, like when I see these channels where people try to type people, from interviews and stuff, I'm always like super skeptical and like, well, how much are you going to get out of one interview? Um, but these guys, I think their name's Chris and Rose. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they are like spot on. And so I got all excited because there's this Jungian synchronicity thing going on because I just watched the video where they are making the argument that, and sort of the analysis, that Elon Musk is an ISTJ. And I got all super excited. So here's why. So I had to drive for work over the past week. And so listen to the full podcast of Elon Musk on Joe Rogan. And it was recorded within the last week or so. So it's pretty recent. And so I'm listening to this, and it's like 3 hours long. And I'm, of course, like everybody else, was just sort of under the impression that Elon Musk was some sort of ENTJ or INTJ. And, because that's sort of the popular opinion, right? That he's this smart guy that's built up all these companies. And so he's clearly an INTJ or an ENTJ. And I've seen other people make the argument he's an INTP, maybe an ENTP, I don't know. But when I'm listening to it, I'm just like, okay, he's clearly TE. He's clearly got, some major TE going on, because all the guy could do is talk about process. And when he's asked a question, he just sort of talks about the process of, what he's doing, what sort of his end goal state is, and how he's going to sort of get there, right? And so watch his interview with Joe Rogan, or frankly watch any of his interviews, and the guy can't help himself from just talking about process. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense for an ENTJ or an INTJ. Either lead TE, very heavy TE, first, second slot. But the more I listen to it, the more I'm thinking, this guy just never makes analogies, right? You never hear him just sort of say, well, it's sort of like this, or it's sort of like that, where he's sort of explaining what he's thinking about, but through an analogy. And one of the things when you're sort of typing intuitives, especially sort of lead intuitives, or like an INTJ or something, like they can't help themselves from, or just speaking in analogies. Like when we are trying to explain a concept to somebody, or trying to explain what we're thinking, the brain just sort of automatically goes to making associations with other things, right? Because that's what intuition is. It's just this, whatever you want to call it, making associations, making patterns, but reading between the lines. But you're essentially, sort of describing something by the way it links to other things, the way it sort of associates with other things. And when you're a lead intuitive, especially an introverted intuitive, like an INFJ or an INTJ, like that all makes sense. It's sort of like this, it's sort of like that. And then you sort of see how the pattern emerges, right? But with Elon Musk, it's very clearly just, it's the only way I can think of it is it's just very systematic and on point, right? He, unlike an intuitive that sort of talks around the issue and tries to sort of circle it and then focus in on it, he just gets straight to it, and that's a very censor kind of way, right? Of explaining what they're thinking. Okay. So couple of things. So I was planning on making a video about how I thought Elon Musk was either an ESTJ or an ISTJ. But also realized, I'm probably going right into the crosshairs of all the people who are going to be like, no, he's totally an INTP or a INTJ or something like that. And I think the bigger thing that I wanted to sort of talk about was this tendency for people in the typology community, especially people who are sort of starting out, tend to think that, like, if you're smart and you're successful because you're smart, that you're automatically an intuitive. And I'm here to tell you that's not that's not the case. Especially in the business world, right? Where, he's sort of made his bread and butter. It's not like he's knocking the doors down with, academic research or breakthroughs in some academic capacity. I mean, he's knocking the doors down on systems. He's knocking the doors down on business. And so when you're thinking of people who are sort of smart and successful, outside of the typology community, and frankly, outside of sort of academia and the ivory tower, it's the SJs. Quite frankly, it's the sensors that most of the world looks at and says, okay, that's a smart person. That is a smart, successful person. Because, by and large, when people think of intelligence outside of academia, they think of capability, right? Are you capable of accomplishing whatever you're asked to do, right? I guess in ocean terms, it would be like conscientiousness, right? So it's a combination of capability and grit, right? Like the ability to sort of take on responsibility and see it through, but in a very capable manner. Or industriousness is one way of sort of thinking of conscientiousness. And again, outside of the YouTube sort of echo chamber of MBTI and sociotics and psychological types and whatnot, trust me, the outside world sees the ISTJs and the ESTJs as the smart ones because they are the capable ones. And not only that, but like their ability to be pragmatic and to get the job done is just seen as sort of what I don't want to say the normal, but the average Joe and Jane see as intelligent. Okay. And so one thing that I would encourage people that are sort of in the, psychological type community, the MBTI community, is to sort of drop the notion that if you're smart and capable, that you're somehow an intuitive versus a sensor. Because it's only true in a very limited kind of context, and so in academia, I think there's what I call the Einstein complex, where everybody in academia who wants to be sort of successful or notable, they have this Einstein complex where they feel like they have to come up with something new, something novel, something that people haven't ever thought of before, right? In the way that Einstein came up with his theories of general relativity and special relativity and everything else that he came up with. It was, going against the grain. It was sort of overturning hundreds of years of physics and saying, okay, well, let's look at it in a different way. And it sort of explains some things that, weren't sort of fitting into the old model. And that, by and large, is the way academia works. And I would say for good reason, right? Like the whole point of science is to not get fixated or stuck in a certain way of thinking about things and sort of exploring into new ways of thinking and new ways of, describing things. And so in the theoretical world, like whether it's physics or mathematics or psychology or economics or whatever, yes, you do need those sort of lead intuitive types, either the INTPs, the INTJs, those types that are just going to sort of think of like a new way of looking at things, right? But and so they come across as very smart, very intelligent, but in that kind of way, right? They're able to see things, come up with new ideas, and apply new theories so that it sort of fits the data a little bit better. And they try to avoid just sort of getting stuck in a rut and just sort of doing things just to be doing them. Because of course science doesn't advance that way, right? And so you need those people who are thinking about things in a different way. But that's not to say that if somebody is smart and capable that they have to be one of these intuitives that thinks about things in different ways. And in the business world, and quite frankly, just in the world in general, outside of academia, it really is the people who understand the way that things work and figure out a way to apply it in a very, efficient or systematic way, right? So Elon Musk doesn't have to come up with new theories about how things work or anything. Like you could just tell him, like, hey, here's how a spaceship works, or here's how a car works, or here's how batteries work, or here's how solar energy works. And he gets it and he puts it into his SI data bank and then uses that TE to figure out, okay, well, how can we apply this knowledge in a way that is, going to be beneficial to the company or beneficial to mankind or whatever. But I don't need to think of a new way to generate solar energy, or I don't need to think of a new way to, uh, come up with like a completely new battery. I just need to figure out a way to make it work better, right? Using the same principles that we all sort of know and agree to, but I'm just going to figure out a way, and I'm just going to keep working at it, working at it, working at it to find something that works more efficiently. And that is Elon Musk, right? And the other thing is, he's sort of notorious for sort of taking people's ideas and then just making them better, right? And nothing says SJ more than that to me. So he did not come up with Tesla, the car company, right? I mean, he he did not come up with PayPal. He did not come up with Boring. He did not come up with SpaceX. Other people sort of came to him with this idea, right? Or he might have said, hey, I want to build SpaceX, so I'm going to go find a bunch of smart, rocket scientists, but Tesla's the best example. It was started by other people and they were probably intuitives and had sort of breakthrough ideas in the way that intuitives do, but he's the one that came in and said, okay, well, here's how we're going to do it. Here is sort of the systematic way of doing it. And a lot of people knock him because he sort of built this car company out of getting tax credits and all that kind of stuff. But that that again is just such an SJ kind of thing. Like, hey, there's all these tax credits, and we can do this, we can do that, and we can make enough money just sort of selling tax credits and whatnot to sort of fund our making our inventory, making our product and all that kind of stuff. And he just figured out this way to make the system work in his favor. Now, some people might think, okay, well, that was sort of outside of the box intuitive thinking. And I don't really think so, right? I mean, he basically just said, okay, I can get money doing this, and then I can use the money that I get from doing this to do that, and then just sort of pieced it together. Okay. And then the other thing is, just watch the way he interacts with people, he doesn't go deep into ideas. He doesn't want to expand on ideas to sort of link different things together in the way that maybe an INTP or an INTJ would want to do. Instead, he focuses on the process. Like every time he responds, and maybe I'll try to cut out some clips out of his interview to show what I'm talking about. But whenever he responds, he's focused on just letting you know what the process is. Okay. So from sort of a systematic way of typing him, it's sort of like doing those little logic puzzles where you mark off what you know is not true, and then whatever's left over is what you think, was sort of the answer. So by process of elimination, I mean, first of all, to me, he's clearly FE polar, right? Like he has a very hard time just sort of interacting with whoever's interviewing him or whoever's talking to him. He doesn't do sort of the typical leaning in and uh-huh. It's all like the information's coming to him, he processes it, and then he gives you his response, right? And that's a very FE polar kind of thing. Now he probably is coached. He's probably got some sort of PR manager or just somebody who's on his team that sort of coaches him on these little FE rules. And so you'll see him, try to be a little FE and do things. But it clearly isn't coming naturally to him or like without effort, right? And so to me, he's pretty clearly FE polar. You could make the argument that it's FE fourth, and I'd listen to that. But let's just go with FE polar for now, right? So that's gonna make him either an INTJ or an ISTJ, right? TE, I think we can sort of settle on, he's always about the process. He's clearly locked into process. That's just what he focuses on, and what makes him successful. And so then it comes down to, is he an SI versus an NI type? And there, again, with the NI types, we speak in analogies. We speak around a topic and sort of make connections to other topics where it's sort of like, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, do you get like the point I'm trying to make? As opposed to just getting straight to the point and just saying like, here's what it is. And here are the facts. And you should, you can take the facts and apply them as you will. NI is more about trying to explain like why the facts are what they are, right? And I just don't see him doing that, right? Like he's very smart, he knows his facts, he can lay them all out, but he's not trying to explain why solar energy works in the way that it does, or why such and such company needs to be set up like that. He just sort of says, here's what it is. Now, he will sort of think of sort of maybe novel ideas to solve to solve a particular problem. Like, for example, he was talking about, you know, um, solar powered cars and how they're hard to power because they have, like, you can't just put solar panels on a car because they don't have a whole lot of surface area. Okay, that's a very SI kind of thing. Um, but he doesn't really go into sort of a way to think about it that way. Like he just spits out the facts and just says, okay, this is the problem. Now he can maybe take that problem and come up with a practical TE type of solution to it, but he's not going to be thinking about it in any sort of abstract way. He thinks about it in a very concrete way, right? So if we've got a surface area problem, then let's just increase the surface area. How can we do that? As opposed to, trying to think of some completely new way of, storing the solar energy or whatever, or putting the solar panels on the road instead of the car, that kind of stuff, sort of thinking outside of the physical constraints of the problem and thinking outside of the box and coming up with sort of new intuitive ways of thinking of it. So anyways, hope this helps. But it is sort of a bigger point I've been wanting to make about ESTJs, ISTJs, ESFJs, ISFJs, where there is this tendency to just sort of think of them as, non-thinkers or just not capable or smart enough on things, and that is just not true. Especially if you spend any amount of time in the business world, those are the capable people. Those are the people who don't get hung up on the ifs, ands, buts, maybes, what could happen, what might happen. To be honest with you, if you're one of those types that's just like constantly thinking of like all the things that could happen or could be a problem, or you have a hard time getting to the point and you just, like me, sort of talk around the issue until you finally center in on the point you're trying to make, that does not come across as capable, and it does not come across as smart. It comes across as being like, way too academic, way too pedantic, and what we would typically say is impractical, right? Like, a lot of people in the business world and the just sort of day-to-day working world, like they just want to know what they're supposed to do, right? They just want somebody who's going to tell them like, here's what we're doing, here's the goal, here are the steps that we need to take along the way, and here's how we're all going to achieve it and get along and all of that. And they don't need somebody who's just sort of thinking of all the ifs, ands, or buts, or at least not like in front of people. Like if you put them in the back and they can think through it. And so, but in sort of the academic sort of MBTI community, there's sort of this attitude of like, well, they're just sort of going through the process and they're not, smart or whatever. That's not true at all. And also, as somebody who used to give intelligence tests to just all types of people, yes, INTPs do very well on intelligence tests. There's no doubt about it. INTJs are probably going to do pretty well, ENTPs, all of that. But you get a good, well-rounded ESTJ, ISTJ, they do very well. The only thing I think that probably trips them up is there's a part, at least in the Waze test, there's a part where you have to sort of, you look at pictures and you try to describe what's wrong with the picture. And that is a very intuitive kind of thing. Like you have to see the way that you have to see sort of the inner meaning of what's going on in this picture. And you can't just rely purely on the sensory data. You have to sort of understand the meaning. For example, they might show a picture of like a snowy farm scene, right? There's a farm and it's snowed, and they ask you, okay, what's wrong with the picture? And there might not be snow on the roof of a barn or something, or and so you have to sort of intuitively think like, okay, there should be snow on that barn, and it's not something that a sensor is necessarily going to pick up on. But there's not to say that they don't. But they do very well in the math part. They do very well in the verbal reasoning part. They do very well in sort of the spatial awareness part. And so, it all depends on what you're measuring, I guess is my point, right? Again, talking around the point until you finally get to it. An ESTJ would have started this video, gotten to the point, and it'd be over within 30 seconds. But the INTJs, the INFJs, we talk around things. We try to make associations and try to bring people into thinking about it the way that we're thinking about it. And it's a very, sort of loose network of thoughts that are sort of connected, as opposed to a very direct, linear way of approaching the problem. So I implore you, especially if you're sort of new to the whole MBTI thing, don't get hooked on just sort of automatically thinking if somebody is sort of known for being bright, known for being accomplished, known for being smart or whatever, that they're automatically an intuitive, because that is just not the case, especially in the business world, right? Um, and and I also want to sort of talk about the INTP arguments too. So first of all, again, he shows way more TE than TI, and yes, we all have TI, and yes, we all have TE, but he is just such a TE monster that like any sort of input you give him, it's just TE just comes out of him. Again, it's just process, process, process. As opposed to the TI, where TI is more about analyzing things and sort of checking whether something's true or false, valid or invalid, and not like trying to take the knowledge and apply it in a particular way. And so for the TI types, like the INTPs, their conversations are much different, because somebody will say, well, I think X, Y, and Z is the case. And they will say, well, maybe X and Y are the case, but not Z. And here's why. They sort of break down in a very analytical way. And they're constantly just like, they're either telling you that you're wrong or they're telling you that you're right, right? Like every little thing that an interview tells an INTP in particular, they will either say, you can see it sort of registering. They'll either say, yes, that is right, or they will say, no, that is wrong, and and sort of analyze it and explain it. So I think of it as like they're more of a sculptor, right? Like sculptors will take a big rock and they chisel it away to come up with their artwork. And so they're taking the information and they're chiseling it down to what's right, what's logic, what logical conclusion is valid or invalid, and they sculpt it down into, information that they can work with, data that they can work with. Where a extroverted thinker is more like a painter, like, okay, let's make something, let's take the information that we have or the paint or whatever that we've got and make something out of it, right? As opposed in and yeah, I mean, TE could be like sort of systematizing and making things more efficient and getting rid of waste and everything, but at the heart of it, it's about creating something out there, right? So it's just the way that I think about it, a sculptor versus a painter. Um, and I would say even like FI and FE, you can make the same analogy. But again, that's what introverted intuitives do. We make these little analogies, and sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. But we're sort of assuming that like you're going to make the same connection, the same thought connections that we're making, as opposed to a sensor who's just going to say, look, here's the facts, here's how things work. And if you, sort of put two and two together, you're going to get four. Now, he might be, sort of supercharged at, putting all those facts together and coming up with logical conclusions. That's great. That's why he's successful in the way that he is. But he's not doing it in this, I don't want to say abstract way, because, he is doing sort of mathematical abstract things, but he's not doing it in an like he's not building analogies. He's not making loose connections and sort of testing whether or not that connection makes sense or that way of explaining it makes sense. He's not trying to get down to like the core, the essence of it. Like he just wants to make it work, right? That's an ISTJ, maybe an ESTJ, but the fact that he's so FE polar makes me, sort of side on the ISTJ front. So, anyways, thank you to TalkBook for making my point for me before I had to, so I didn't have to go out there and be outside of the herd on this. But check out their channel; it's interesting. I've enjoyed it so far. So, anyways, thanks for listening to me. I hope all this makes sense, and I look forward to the comments telling me that he's an INTP. or an INTJ. And I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. So let's hear it. All right. Talk to you later. Have a good night.